Bible Answers with Dr. Al Garza.
All right, welcome back to another edition of Bible Answers Unfiltered. I am your host, Dr. Al Garza. So welcome back. I want to go over something today. I came across this video by Dr. White the other day where he was giving his final interpretation of John 6:44 based on the debate that he had. And I guess someone sent him a link of a Oxford graduate who critiqued his Greek usage. And it wasn't really a critique. It was more of a, kind of a so what type of deal. And Dr. White didn't like that. In fact, he stopped playing the video when he heard him critique him. And so he never even watched the whole thing. But that shows a type of mentality or the ego that he has about himself, that he can't be criticized, he can't be challenged, he can't even acknowledge that somebody else might have a different view or a different interpretation. Now, this video, I'm not going to play the whole video. I'll leave a link here to the parts where he goes into this, trying to do a little bit of a Greek analysis, a little bit of a parsing here. But if you see from the beginning, he starts at 635, and he tries to explain, and you can watch this for himself. He uses the Greek. Now, the Greek, he's trying to use the Greek in a way that tries to use it to affirm his position, but it doesn't. We all agree with the Greek, how participles work and the different types of the words that are used in the Greek and the grammar and so forth, but it's based on his interpretation of what it means, not on anything else. So he thinks that nobody else can have a different interpretation, and in this video he goes over that. But I want to focus on what he does here at 644, because this is telling on how he views the whole account of this chapter, or this section of the chapter 6. Now, when we do biblical exegesis, we have to consider a lot of things, and I have a list here I want to go through real quick. But this is something Dr. White does not do in any of this video presentation. He relies on a little bit of the Greek and his own interpretation, his own Calvinistic interpretation of the passage. The Greek does not affirm his interpretation. You can have a different interpretation, a different way of reading it, looking at it, and you have to. This is where exegesis comes in. When you look at a text, you look at the historical context. Now, what does that mean? You look at the background, the historical background. You consider the time period. You consider the culture, context, authorship, intended audience, and any relevant historical events leading up to that point. He doesn't do that. He briefly gives a view of what happened prior, but he ignores who Jesus is coming to. He's in Capernaum talking to Jews at the synagogue. And it's understood he probably read the scriptures there. And then, of course, we go over verse 44, 45, and so forth. So, but Dr. White will give a couple things in this whole entire explanation that has nothing to do with his interpretation. In fact, throughout the presentation, I agree with him on everything he says with the Greek. When I read the Greek, I read it, and you'll hear me read it as more of a modern Greek and modern Hebrew. When I look at the Hebrew, I kind of have the modern Hebrew pronunciation, modern Greek. I might jump around with Erasmus's pronunciation depending on the words. But reading it, he goes to verse 35, and I'll look at this real quick here before we jump in. Where Jesus says, "I am the bread of life. He that comes to me will never hunger, and he that believeth in me shall never thirst." And of course, Dr. White focuses on the ha archimos, the one coming, and of course, ha pisteon, the one believing. That's what he focuses on. No one denies that. It's the ones who are coming and believing. They will never be hungry. They will never be thirsty. Again, but what he does here is he inserts himself and all the elect into these passages with the coming or the giving and the drawing and the coming and all these things. He inserts himself and the elect into all of the passages. And that is not how you do biblical exegesis. That's not how you interpret the verses or the text. And that's what he does the whole time. All the way when he gets down to 644. He even talks about, the rolling of the scrolls and all these things that were, that he doesn't understand how they used to do that, but where they used to just take it out and open it up to where they left off from the last Sabbath. He thinks that they roll them from beginning to end, and they have these Popeye arms from doing all that. No, anybody's gone to a synagogue, and I've been through services on the Sabbath in synagogues. When they pull out the scroll, they set it down, and they just open up where they last left off. That's why you see some size bigger than others. But again, the Greek does not give him the interpretation he's hoping for. He's going to insert the interpretation, and we're going to see it verse 44 here, and I want him to explain this so you can see. So I want you to look at how he interprets verse 44 and 45 into the rest of the verses prior. And again, we're going to focus on some of the things he says. I'll stop and play here and there. We'll look at the Hebrew, and then we'll kind of go from there. So let's start off here.
So we have the grumbling of the Jews. We get by their gungus mooing, and we get down to the key text. And if there's anything that I'm thankful for from all of this stuff, is we have a much stronger, I think we've all been forced to think this through more completely, because synergists who do the Norman Geisler type thing, that standard sort of Arminian response, they're not presenting as strong a case, or at least as interesting a case. The provisionists are trying to turn the entire text upside down. They're going to verse 45, and they are giving you an acontextual interpretation that then allows them to read back all the way up to verse 37, a free will autonomy understanding of what comes afterwards. And it changes the entire meaning of the text. So no one can come to me unless something takes place, verse 44. Unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him. These are the same hymns. I know we've gone through all this before, but more and more people are listening. So these are the same hymns. And I will raise him up on the last day. Did we just not hear raise him up? Yes. That's receiving eternal life. And so all who are drawn by the Father are raised up to eternal life by the Son. That's why if this text just stood on its own, there's no way to be a provisionist synergist.
So let's talk about that again. If the text stands on its own based on his interpretation, how he understands it, then yes, then synergist, doesn't exist. Again, this is based on interpretation. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. And I'll raise it up on the last day. Yes, this is eschatological, where it's the last day, the resurrection. And again, the context is those who are drawn, or again, I'm going to the Hebrew, Aramaic, the Greek. Remember, when we deal with exegesis, we deal with historical context, we deal with literary context, we deal with language and translation. Now, literary context is analyzing text in a larger work, with the motifs, narrative structures, the stylist elements of the text, all those things. Language and translation. If the text has been translated from its original language, we study the nuances of the original language and how it affects the interpretation. In this case, Jesus is speaking Hebrew, not Greek. He's reading from the Hebrew scriptures, not Greek, not the Septuagint. That's now universally agreed pretty much, unless you're Dr. White or you're someone who looks at, outdated scholarship work. And again, genre, we look at genre analysis, narrative. If it's this is a narrative, there's poetry, prophecy, and all that. We do a textual analysis, pay attention to key words and phrases and rhetorical devices used by John. Contextual analysis we use interpretation, which we base on historical, literary, and textual context, consider different possible meanings and interpretations, which Dr. White does not do. He will stand confused in this video and say, I don't understand how God can do this or do. and he uses that as a ploy to confuse people. He argues in this passages how like a non-Trinitarian would, by pretending to be confused. How can three be one? How can one be three? I don't understand. Even though it's fully understandable, you can fully comprehend it and see in Scripture. Dr. White will say, and he said this in his other debates, how could you come to the Father but not the Son? If you can freely come to the Father, then how do you not freely come to the Son? And he plays this dumb part of pretending to be dumb about it. Then we got to compare commentaries, other scholarly commentaries and interpretations to gain better insights, which he does not do. Again, he doesn't do any of the things I just listed, except his interpretation based on obscure passages in the Greek that nobody disagrees with. Nobody challenges these things from the Greek. And yet he sits there and he'll do this the whole video, and he'll play kind of the dumb card and say, I don't understand how they can look at it this way. And then he'll give, well, this is how they might answer. But this doesn't make sense. I mean, he plays this role very well to bring confusion. Now, again, the drawing up. No one can come to me. This is a Jewish context. Again, to the Jews, the synagogue, historical audience, all those things are considered. And again, they're looking at how Jesus dealt with them in Jerusalem in John chapter 5, John 6, in fact, in John 7. He even tells them in John 7 that did not Moses give you the Torah, verse 19, and yet none of you carries out the Torah. You don't follow the Torah. You search the Scriptures, you think any of them have life. Moses will be your accuser because he spoke of me, and if you believe Moses, you'd believe me in John 5. So again, these are some of the things that Dr. White doesn't consider. And in the linguistic, the Aramaic, the Hebrew, this is very lazy and poor exegesis, and we're going to see how he continues to manipulate the text. So let's listen in.
Because it's not the case that the Father draws everyone. And everyone who is drawn is raised up to eternal life. And if this is dependent upon the Father's action, that's the sovereignty of God in election and salvation. So, what can they do? Well, they go to verse 45. It is written in the prophets, they shall all be taught by God. Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. And what's, I think, neat now is we have been forced to respond to a new kind of argumentation here that I think helps us to understand the text even more consistently and deeply. So, it is written in the prophets.
All right, let me stop there. It is not a new interpretation. It is not a new way of looking at the text. This has been going on. F.F. Bruce has a commentary on this. Other scholarly work has done on this. This is not new. Okay, so again, we look at the word draw. No, Father who sent me. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. The drawing. Look at BDAG. Look at other commentaries. It means to lead in an effectual way, loving way. In fact, it's used in Jeremiah 31, which is partly cited here as the same word that that God draws in a loving way the children of Israel, the sons of Israel, which we're going to see. And so the draw never means regeneration. I haven't found one lexicon that equates that, or born again, or born from above, or any kind of transition into salvation. None of those things. That's an interpretation. That's how Dr. White sees when he sees draws him. That's regeneration. Well, it can simply say he leads him. Who is he leading? This is where that differs. Dr. White will insert the elect, Jew and Gentile, into this, including himself, instead of looking at the children of Israel, which is being fulfilled in verse 45. We don't read it backwards. The prophecy in 45 explains what just took place, what is explaining what is taking place amongst the children of Israel, so that they can understand that this is being fulfilled. It's a messianic prophecy. John Gill's commentary agrees on this. There are other Jewish sources that agree that this is messianic, and this is a fulfillment of prophecy. Now, prophecy, everyone knows, comes at the end of what's taking place. As it is written, this must be fulfilled. It's all through John. It's in an order that we look at that explains what just took place. So it's not part of what Dr. White's going to say here, that this is something that happens because of what took place. No, this is the fulfillment. Isaiah was written before. We're going to look at the Greek on this because having been written Okay, perfect past nominative, singular, having been written in the prophets. Gekromenon, it has been written. But he's going to focus on here a little bit on verse, again, 44. Again, I'm using more of a modern Greek and Hebrew. And again, we'll look at how he looks at it, and we'll kind of see where he goes off on this.
Let me, I need to have both sides up here. So, come on. There it is. That's how I want it. It is written in the prophets. Now, when Jesus is teaching, and he goes to the Old Testament text, he provides the foundation. He is demonstrating that what he's teaching is consistent with what has been revealed from the beginning, and as we know who he is, he himself was involved in revealing it. It is written in the prophet.
Notice what he said, revealing, not fulfilling, revealing. This becomes what he's trying to explain happens after verse 44 by saying this is revealing. No, it is not revealing. It is fulfilling. It is being fulfilled. It is written first in Isaiah, and it's being fulfilled now. So 45, in the writing, it having been written, gegraminon, in the perfect passive nominative sense, singular, having been written in the past, the Greek word there, gegraminon, is again grammatically in the past, going back what Isaiah had wrote to be fulfilled. This is why every text says fulfilled, what it needs to be fulfilled by the Messiah to the sons of Israel first, to the Jew first. Messianic prophecy before the death, burial, and resurrection. Consistent with the theme of the synagogue in Capernaum, and again, not consistent with James White's interpretation. It is not, but let's listen to what he says.
Now, it's interesting that is plural, because that could refer to the idea, sometimes the plural of prophets is used. The scrolls, you didn't have a separate scroll for every prophet. You had the major prophets, and then sometimes you'd have minor prophets toward the end of that scroll. And so if you talk about the prophets, it could be a sort of a generic way of referring to the prophets rather than a specific name. And the minor prophets were all considered one book, and they were normally, the major prophets were easier to get to because they're at the beginning of the scroll. If you're getting to one of the minor prophets, something like that, you've got to go through a lot of turning. It's not turning pages, because remember, these are scrolls. To get to the end of the scroll, you had to have Popeye forearms to be able to.
Again, that's not how scrolls are done in synagogues, or even during that time. If they were rolled up, they would open up to where they left off, and every time they finished, they would slightly unroll it for every other reading. If it goes, this is why you see some sides of the scrolls larger than others with the little wheel turning. They don't roll back and forth every time to find their spots. It's already there. So when they set it down, they just slightly open it, read it, and then bring it to a close. And as they finish, they just roll over the section they read for the next Sabbath. That is how scrolls work. He doesn't know that. And for him to say what he said just shows he does not know what he's talking about. And again, we're going to look at this passage in the Hebrew, the Aramaic, and how he's going to interpret it, which is incorrect. So let's continue.
To be able to get there. So maybe that's what that's referring to. The other possibility is this. The phrase, and you can see it's in all caps here in the LSB. And they shall all be taught by God. It's just 3 words. Pontes didactoi theou. So this is the genitive of agency. The agency by which someone becomes taught is by God. God is the one doing the teaching here. So Jesus is taking this text from either Isaiah 54 or Jeremiah 31, both of which, go read them. Beautiful passages. You should know the Jeremiah 31 one. That's the New Covenant text. Hebrews 8. We've gone through that.
So yeah, it's definitely referencing Isaiah again, Isaiah 54:13. And if we look at that, and there's a part of it in Jeremiah, but Jeremiah goes back to the drawing, which we're going to look at. But in Isaiah, of course, and all your sons will be taught by God or by the Lord. The Hebrew vekol benayech lemodei Adonai, and all your sons will be taught as disciples, lemodei Adonai, as disciples by God. These are disciples. The sons of Israel who are disciples will be taught by God. Now, this can be used as a proof text for the deity of Messiah, because there's the Messiah right there teaching them, telling them, explaining to them, and they're not listening. So we can also look at that as being a direct reference to Jesus himself as God. That's a possibility. But these were sons of Israel, disciples of God in the context. In Jeremiah 31, I believe it's referring to the drawing, because in verse 3 of 31, it says, "And the Lord appeared to him from afar, saying, I have loved you with an everlasting love, therefore I have drawn you with loving kindness." It's the same Greek word used to draw in the Greek there for draw. So this is the same passage for helkos and for drawing that's used in Jeremiah 31. So that's why I think the connection is there, because Jesus is referring to, again, how the Father, and you could read verse from chapter 31, Jeremiah 31 to 1, because it says, "I will be the God of all my families of Israel, and they shall be my people. For the people who survived the sword found grace in the wilderness, Israel, when it went to find its rest. Therefore, the Lord appeared to them and from afar, saying, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, I have drawn you with loving kindness." It's the same in the Septuagint, the same Greek word. But in the Hebrew here, it's to lead. It's an affectionate leading. It's not drawing the way he's interpreting it for regeneration. He's going to lead them with loving kindness. And it says, "And again, I will build you, and you will be rebuilt, O Virgin of Israel." Again, you will take up this tambourines and go forth in the dances of the merrymaker. Again, this is referring to Israel, restoration, when the Messiah comes. That's the drawing there. And then he quotes the passage that we just mentioned here. Again, they'll be disciples by God, taught by, in the Aramaic, it literally says, "And the sons of Israel will be taught the Torah by God, or will learn the Torah by God." So the Aramaic is more precise to saying of Isaiah, the sons of Israel, your sons will be Torah learners by God. And this is not saying that God, again, is literally, he's teaching them through the prophets, as we have said before in other videos. So again, he's going to try and make a connection. He thinks this means revealed. It is not revealed. This is fulfillment. And he's going to try and connect this as an elect thing when it is not. Historically, again, we went through the list. He's ignoring the exegesis of the text and putting eisegesis of the elect into it, period. And I don't know any really serious scholar who would agree with how he's applying these verses, but let's continue.
Rather thoroughly on the last road trip, responding to our friends up in Moscow. That was right after Reformation Day, remember? Excuse me. Man, like I said, either the bronchitis is coming back and I'm dying of something else, or it's just simply, I've got the windows open and I haven't taken any antihistamines since yesterday. Both passages, Isaiah 54 and Jeremiah 31, are about the new covenant and the finished and completed redemptive work of Christ. And so the people that are in view, this teaching that is being done by God, is not the teaching of the whole world. It's of a specific people. Just as the drawing of verse 44 was of a specific people. And so...
And we all agree with that. Non-Calvinists, we just say it's interpretation. These are the sons of Israel, that particular group, who do believe. They come to Jesus and believe and trust in him, and they will be drawn to him by the Father because they are true disciples of God. He's going to make the inference of being the elect, Jew and Gentile, which is completely foreign to this text and to the way you properly exegete it. And that's what he's going to assert into his understanding from a Calvinist. Let's watch.
What you have in verse 45 is Jesus's biblical commentary saying, see, in the prophets, we already had a reference to the fact that God would be the one making learners. That's what didaktoi. It's an adjective, but it's functioning substantively. So they are taught. They are the learners of God, and the means by which this is happening is God. God's in the genitive, and there's you can use the dative to talk about instrument, means by which something happens.
Again, using the Greek for that does not help. No one disagrees with it. It's not in challenged. He just wants to make it sound like what he's saying is a lot more true than what it is by giving it that interpretation, because he's talking about the theon, how it's used in the genitive, and no, or in the date it could be genitive and their dative. I mean, look, this again, it's in the genitive, theo, but it's not saying what he's saying. Again, even with having been taught by God, no one's disputing that. But it says who is that's being taught by God according to the passage and that we just saw. It is the children of Israel, disciples, those who are true disciples. So the didaktoi, tautheu is not anything refuted. It's how he's interpreting it. And again, he's not going to the languages. Again, this is in Hebrew, written in Hebrew, not looking at the Aramaic, not looking at the fact that this is, even by John Gill and Jewish sources, a messianic text, a messianic fulfillment, and something that's being fulfilled. This is why it's being mentioned last at the end, because that's how it works. But it's encapsulating, explaining. It's not revealing, but explaining. Again, complete and utter, very poor exegesis.
But when there is a special personal element to that, very frequently the genitive will be utilized. That's what's used here. But it says they will all be taught by God. This is the Old Testament citation that Jesus uses to define the drawing of the Father. The Father draws people to Christ, and that infallibly results in their being raised up on the last day.
Draws people to Christ. Again, Jew and Gentile, he's making this a Calvinistic universal elect group. It's not. This is the sons of Israel in the proper context of Isaiah and even in Jeremiah, as we just read. Again, this is not exegesis. This is eisegesis we're seeing here. Plain and simple. Very lazy hermeneutics, ignoring everything we just mentioned of the list we went through. This is what we find. But let's try and finish it anyway.
This is described as the Father teaching. He's teaching about who Jesus is. He's revealing Jesus to these people. This all that the Father draws to the Son, the Father teaches as to who Jesus is. So it then says, and everyone hearing from the Father and learning comes to me. So where have we heard that before? All the Father gives me comes to me. The one looking, the one believing comes to me. Raise him up on the last day. And from this group that is defined by Jesus, all will be taught by God. These are those that are drawn. That's the group. Just as you had up in verse 38 and 39, you had this group as a group. I will lose none of it. Here you have the same group. This is consistent reading all the way through. You're starting up here. You're going down here. You're not jumping around. You're allowing the terms to define themselves in the context without turning things upside down, sideways, whatever you're trying to do.
He's very theatrical, trying to make it sound like he's doing proper exegesis. As we just shown, as we just seen, and what I've explained, he is not following the proper exegesis criteria. He's simply, and then trying to make it sound like weird, like everybody else is turning it upside down who's non-Calvinist, when he is ignoring the Messianic prophecy. He's ignoring that it is explaining, not revealing anything. It's explaining what's taken place in fulfillment of what the Jews, again, are doing and not doing. I mean, this is typical. This is what you see every time Dr. White either discusses or debates, and he takes no criticism at all, because if you dare challenge it or criticize a different interpretation, whether it's the sons of Israel or the elect, he thinks there's no other way possible to read it. And that is really the arrogance of it all that he has, thinking there's no other way. I don't care who you are or what scholar is saying, I don't care. The more consistent view, obviously, is proper exegesis with the list I just gave you that he does not do, he doesn't follow, and he thinks that he's properly doing it, that he's properly fulfilling exegesis here. I'd like to know where you go to school to learn proper exegesis, where you just take a passage like this, read it yourself and interpret it yourself, and use a little bit of Greek to show an interpretation and ignore everything else we just mentioned as if there's nothing else in exegesis to do. I'd like to know what school that is, because to me, I don't. This would be an F in any any standard criteria for doing proper exegesis. This would be a complete F, because he's ignoring everything we listed with context, historical context, literary context, language, translation, genre, textual analysis, interpretation, comparing with commentary, scholarly source. All these things he ignores, and he's just doing his interpretation, his meaning, with a little bit of Greek in there, which again, as the other scholar pointed out, does not give him an interpretation. It's not supporting his interpretation. No one's disagreeing with that. But let's finish this.
Once people do that, you know that's the indication of their traditions. It shall all be taught of God, everyone hearing para tu patros, hearing from the Father. So if you are the recipient of this divine action on the part of God, you're part of that all that is being made to learn by God. You are hearing from the Father. That's what it means to be drawn.
So you saw what he just did. Eisegesis. You are the one. You are the one being drawn. You're the one being learned and taught by God. You. In other words, the reader reading this today, you can insert yourself into this passage and say, he's talking to me. No, he's not. Okay, that is not how you do exegesis. That is not how you do hermeneutics. You don't read a historical narrative like John and then say, oh, look, when it says all and you, and it's me, the reader. He's talking to me. I don't know any serious scholar who would dare say that's proper exegesis. The historical and literary context needs to be taken into place, and the genre, obviously, what's being said here, culture, context, authorship, intended audience, and anything relevant to the events that's taking place, historical background of the text. I mean, this is typical eisegesis right here, where you read a text and say, it's talking about me, the elect, and you ignore everything else that's being mentioned in there, and it's historical Jewish context, and ignore what they understood it to mean with the children of Israel we read in Jeremiah and Isaiah. But we're almost finished.
You have heard from the Father, and you have learned. That's Montano, didactoi. The concepts are, learning and being taught. Those are the Greek words. Are connected concepts. And I think the reason that it goes to the singular, everyone hearing from the Father, everyone learning, comes to me. That coming to me is a is a personal thing, and we've already saw it. We saw it up above. Seeing, believing, coming, everyone given by the Father comes to me. These are all divine actions and descriptions of those who have received this divine, gracious act of the Father, revealing the Son, resulting in our coming to Christ. So the consistency throughout this text, from beginning to end, is not only God's sovereign power to work in this way, explaining the unbelief of the Jews, but it's also central in laying the foundation of what Jesus is going to say after this. Because it's only in coming to him. What is eating his flesh? What is drinking his blood? What is looking upon him? What is believing him? What is trusting him for spiritual food and drink? What is all of that other than a clear teaching of the centrality of Christ, absolute exclusivity, the only way of salvation? And at the end of the chapter, when Jesus is repeating over and over again, and I'll go ahead and pull that up here. I know we've gone an hour, but it doesn't matter. We're not live streaming anyways. But when you get down here to the end, and Jesus has said, the Spirit is the one who gives life, the flesh profits nothing. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and are life. He says, but there are some of you who do not believe, for Jesus knew from the beginning who they were who did not believe and who it was who would betray him. I'm not sure how our open theist friends, they'll do anything to get around stuff like that. And then verse 65, and he was saying, for this reason I have said to you that no one can come to me unless it has been granted him from the Father. He was saying, elegant. Elegant is the imperfect form of Lego. And that refers to a continuous action in the past. In this case, it doesn't have to be continuous. There's different kinds of imperfects, but
okay, so we already let's just recap real quick here before he got to the end. Yes, we agree with that. That's why he kept saying, no one can come to him unless the Father has been granted him from the Father. Again, very Jewish context. Again, we don't disagree with anything that's being said grammatically from the Greek or from the syntax from the Greek or anything in that. Going back to what he said earlier, everyone therefore that has heard and learned of the Father come to me. And again, we don't disagree with that. We look at that from the Greek, pas on hod akasas peratau patros kai mathon arkete pros me. Everyone that has heard, therefore everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. No one disagrees with that. It's just the interpretation of who it's speaking to that we disagree with, versus the elect versus the children of Israel, the sons of Israel. Even here, that he's saying that, again, these little Greek nuances he likes to throw in there has nothing to do with his interpretation. As far as giving it any kind of credence or meaning, as far as, yes, this is how you have to interpret it. It is not. The other way to interpret it is to take yourself out of the text and read it in its historical context of the audience. This is why with the law itself, they were under the Torah. They, as I cited earlier in John 7, he tells them, you have, did not Moses give you the Torah, and yet you did not carry out the Torah. He's going to accuse you. Paul in Galatians, referring to the Torah, talks about that, but that the Torah is a tutor, a servant that leads you to Messiah. It's a servant type leading that you find in the text. So this is what you're going to see, that the Torah leads you to, if you are a true disciple, it will lead you to the Messiah. This is how we view the text. This is how it's understood in a Jewish context. Dr. White here does not want to acknowledge proper exegesis on how we should look at and interpret the text. He's eisegeting it, putting himself in the text with the reader and saying this Jew and Gentile elect. That is not proper exegesis. I'm sorry, it is not. And appealing to the Greek in any way does not support your interpretation. There are other ways to interpret the text outside of the Greek, even affirming the Greek, which we all do. But he can't affirm the Hebrew or the Aramaic the terms. Drawing doesn't, you get BDAG, look at draw, look at this Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic context. It does not fit his interpretation or the giving. It's like a broken record, and I apologize, but it gets frustrating when you see this type of a very poor and lazy way of reading a text, ignoring everything we listed that I just listed earlier of what we're supposed to do when we do an exegete, and he does not follow it. But this is what we get. Every time Dr. White refers to a Calvinistic passage, he automatically, before he begins, inserts elect and Calvinistic lens glasses of how it should read, and does not come do it with proper exegesis. And then, of course, you're going to come out with your Calvinistic view, because that's truly the traditions of men. When you have to, insert your belief into the text prior to even doing any proper exegesis. That is traditions of men, and ignoring everything we just mentioned here. But that's what we get. So I'm sorry, we've gone about 40 minutes. I want to say thank you for listening, tuning in. Have a comment or question, leave it here. Glad to answer it. If you want to go any further discussions, I've made other videos on it the last few days. Look at those as well. But I wanted to get to the Greek here and to the Hebrew and show that this does not agree with what he's saying based on interpretation. And there's other ways to properly exegete and interpret the passage as a whole with the list I gave you. So I hope this helped. Like, share, and subscribe. If you go to our website, you can help donate, see our other projects we're working on. But I want to say thank you, God bless, and have a great day.
Bible Answers with Dr. Al Garza.